Dear listeners, before we start this episode, a quick word from our sponsor DW, Deutsche Welle. In a country like ours, where the population and competition are constantly growing, it's a tall task to make it in big cities like Delhi, Mumbai, or Bengaluru. It requires a certain state of mind to navigate the challenges and seize the opportunities that come your way. Check out DW's inspiring 5-part TV series, Megacity Mindset, showcasing trailblazing individuals across India's vibrant and influential cities. From Bollywood star Abhishek Banerjee's journey in Mumbai to pilot and high flyer Captain Zoya Agarwal breaking barriers in Delhi. Each episode of Megacity Mindset offers a compelling narrative of resilience, ambition, and creativity that drive these megacities. To know what sets these remarkable personalities apart, click on the link in the description to watch DW's Megacity Mindset, currently streaming exclusively on JioCinema. Don't miss out, and remember, success begins in the mind. Now, on with the show. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the right to be forgotten and the reason why it is gaining traction around the world. We also talk about Manu Bhaker winning her second medal at the Paris Olympics. But first, we talk about the confusion, concerns, and changes related to indexation benefits. One of the most contentious decisions that was made during the union budget this time relates to the sale of old property. The government has withdrawn the indexation benefit that people used to get when selling real estate. This has led many to believe that they will now have to pay more taxes on the sale of an old house or a building. Now, while the government has issued a string of clarifications, concerns have refused to die down. So to understand what indexation benefit is and the changes its removal is likely going to bring to the real estate sector, Indian Express's Udit Misra joins us. Udit, first tell us what is indexation and what is indexation benefit?
So before we understand indexation or what indexation benefit means, let's just, for our listeners, understand a simple transaction. Suppose you and I or one of us bought a flat for 1 lakh rupees and over 20 years, that flat became 2 lakh rupees. The market price went up to 2 lakh rupees. So there is an increase in our flat price of 1 lakh. Now, first thing to understand is that this is something called the capital gains. I made an investment, I bought a property, and on that investment, I gained 1 lakh rupees.
Right, and on the surface, this appears to be 100% gain. You bought a flat at 1 lakh rupees, which you are now selling for 2 lakh rupees.
Yeah. And so on the surface, this is a capital gains of 1 lakh rupees over a property which was bought for 1 lakh rupees. And the period is 20 years. But there is something that happens in real life, which is called inflation, which is to say that when the general price level rises from 1 year to another, whatever you were buying for 100 rupees today, you will not be able to buy it for 100 rupees the next year. You will need a little more. So suppose the inflation rate is 4%, then the second year to buy the same thing, you will need 104 rupees. So now the same principle also applies to that house. Over 20 years, suppose the normal inflation was such that buying that house meant that after 20 years, you could have bought it for only 1,65,000, right? Instead of 1 lakh. So which means that the normal inflation itself would have taken the house price to 1,65,000.
Right, because 1 lakh rupees after 20 years is not the same as it was before.
Exactly, because the 1 lakh 20 years ago is not the same as 1 lakh today. That 1 lakh 20 years ago is more like 1,65,000 today, right? Because money has lost its value. Now, if we consider this example, then the capital gains that we were talking about, which was earlier 1 lakh, then turns out to be only 35,000, right? And the difference between these two calculations, between a capital gains of 35,000 in the second case and 1 lakh in the first case, that is essentially the indexation effect. And that is essentially the indexation benefit. Now, the government can say, I will charge you 10% on your capital gains. So in the first case, it'll be 10% of 1 lakh rupees when there is no indexation benefit.
Right, in that case, I'm paying the government 10,000 rupees as taxes.
Yes. So in the first case, you will be paying 10,000 rupees to the government, right? Because it's 10%. But in the second case, because the government is willing to give you indexation benefit, it will say, okay, I will not look at the first 65,000 of the increase, right? And I will only look at the last 35,000 as your genuine capital gains, as your genuine gain on investment, because this is not explained by inflation, right? And so I will apply 10% of this, of 35,000, which is 3,500. So the difference between the two would be you're paying 10,000 in the first case and only 3,500 in the second case. And that's essentially the difference of what an indexation benefit means. So in the second case, you're getting benefit of indexation to the amount of 6,500, the difference between 10,000 and 3,500. Now, this is a very rudimentary, very basic example, but it just tells you some of the basic concepts in what are we discussing. Now, what has happened in this budget is that until now, there was an indexation benefit given on many things like gold and property. Now, the government has done two things in this budget. One, it has taken away the indexation benefit. Two, it has reduced the tax rate applicable on long-term capital gains. These are long-term capital gains. You know, if you hold a property for more than a year or two, you have to face long-term capital gains. So the government has reduced the tax rate applicable for such capital gains. Now, it's a toss-up now between what happens to you, whether you benefit from this decision or not, totally depends on how much was the inflation rate, how much was the indexation benefit that your property was enjoying, and how much is the tax rate. So the government has reduced the tax rate from 20% to 12.5%, but it has also taken away the indexation benefit. And as we've seen in the previous example, that indexation benefit can be substantial. It all depends on what are the exact measures of your property.
Right. So there is a chance, for example, that even though the indexation benefit is gone, it could be offset by the long-term capital gains tax going down.
Yeah. So I can give listeners a very simple rule of thumb. Now, there are two factors that are affecting the eventual result if you are somebody wanting to sell your property. There is an element of inflation rate, right? The rate at which general prices have increased. And then the other factor is the rate at which property prices have increased. So suppose you hold a property for 5 years or 7 years or any X number of years. There are these two factors that are influencing your property prices, right? And your eventual so-called capital gains. One is the rate at which general prices are increasing and the rate at which property prices are increasing. Now, as a rule of thumb, very broadly speaking, specifics will differ. If the inflation rate is much higher, the general inflation rate, general prices in the economy have grown much faster than the rate at which the property prices have risen, then this loss of indexation benefit will be substantial for you, right? Because the bigger factor here is the inflation. So losing that benefit will be a bigger hit to you.
Right, because with an indexation benefit, you would have gained a lot.
Yes, because the indexation benefit is related to inflation level. If inflation levels were very high relative to, say, the property prices rising, that rate of property prices rising, then you would have benefited a lot from the indexation effect. Similarly, if the general rate of inflation has been very low over that period, suppose over 5 years or 7 years, wherever you hold the property, but the property prices per se have gone up quite substantially, then this will not matter so much, right? Because if inflation itself has not been too substantial, then indexation benefit perhaps will not be so substantial, especially considering that overall tax rate has come down from 20 to 12.5. Right? So these are the two sort of moving parts, and it will totally depend, on these two relative strengths of these two factors that will determine who benefits and who doesn't. And so similarly, if you have a property in Lucknow and I have a property in, say, Bhagalpur, and they are increasing at different rates and the general price level obviously will be the same for us, that inflation rate would be the same. We may differ in our eventual, effect because of what happens to the property prices in these two cities, at the rate at which they have increased.
And is one of the reasons this has made people nervous because inflation has been high for some time now?
Yeah. So that is obviously one of the big issues. Inflation has been a thing that has bothered people a lot. So that is one thing that, immediately coming after a series of years when inflation has been outside even by RBI's standard and so dominant in the public perception, one of the big issues in the elections this time. If you say that the government policy will not give you some kind of a cover for index for inflation, then it seems like a bad move. Seems like a move that will hurt people. Maybe over a period of 10 years, it may not. The mathematics may work out differently. But that is definitely one issue. And there are other issues also. For example, a lot of people now argue that this may incentivize people from openly declaring what the property prices are. This may open the doors further for black money to come into the real estate sector. And black money is something that is almost part and parcel of real estate dealings. So it's not as if it was not happening earlier, but this may just further entrench that system, may strengthen that move where, two people trading a property may keep the prices low on paper, but, just shift money through informal channels.
Okay, so one thing to note is that just because the indexation benefit is gone doesn't necessarily mean that you will end up paying more taxes. There will be other factors involved as well. But Udit, in the end, could you just recap some of the biggest takeaways for you?
So 2-3 takeaways. One is that obviously, while there are some broad thumb rules to how it will play out, and somebody can make tables also on this with different parameters, they'll still be formulaic in that sense. Nobody will know exactly what will happen, and it will depend from location to location because factors will change. The other thing will be there is a chance that it may further strengthen the black money component in real estate, which would be a sad thing. The third would be that people may start selling properties. Those may be decided by decisions on this count, that periods when the inflation level is low and property prices have still risen higher, they may then see at the end of those periods that people may want to make the most of it by selling the property at that time so that they pay lesser capital gains tax.
And next we talk about the right to be forgotten. If there's any information about you on the internet, a photograph, a video, or an article, chances are that it will remain there forever, or at least for a really long period of time, whether you like it or not. But over the years, there has been a growing demand across the world to have specific information about yourself removed from the internet. This is the right to be forgotten. And in some parts of the world, including the European Union, this is now an intrinsic part of their data protection laws. Here in India, the Supreme Court earlier this month agreed to hear a case whose outcome will likely shape the contours of the right to be forgotten. The top court will have to decide whether the right to be forgotten is a fundamental right, and if so, how it relates to the other fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution of India. In this segment, Indian Express's Apurva Vishwanath joins us to tell us more about it. Apurva, can you tell us where the idea of the right to be forgotten comes from?
So the idea is that if you have a right to privacy, a right to control your personal information, which basically means you get to call the shots about what personal information about you is out there on the internet, right? So a corollary of that is, of course, if there is any unwanted information about you, you should be able to get it removed. Having said that, getting it removed is not that easy on the internet, as we may know. If you've ever tried to get your phone number deleted from Truecaller, you would know how difficult that process is. But that is essentially the right to be forgotten. So how we operationalize this right is you ask the search engine to not have this show up in one of their results when someone searches for you or when someone searches information about that.
And Apurva, can you talk about how this plays out when a criminal case is considered? For example, if someone has been acquitted in a case and wants articles about the matter to be removed from the internet, can that be done under the right to be forgotten?
So in the Indian context, this is essentially the gray area that we are in. When it comes to criminal cases, an acquittal also doesn't mean that, a person did not commit the crime, right? It sometimes is that the prosecution could not prove the case against a particular accused. So there are multiple reasons for an acquittal, and it's not so simple and not so black and white. So a lot of isolated judgments, if you look at from the high courts, they're all conflicted on this point, whether, you should be able to remove a reported judgment on an acquittal. So the Delhi High Court in one case has recently allowed, in fact, he's an American citizen whose acquittal in a narcotics case has been allowed to be removed from search. But the problem is, we still are in a very nascent stage in India, at least understanding about this. So, this is a case that we've mentioned in our story. But if you read it, and you Google that case where the Delhi High Court grants him the right to be forgotten, that case actually mentions his name, mentions that he was acquitted in a narcotics case. So it really doesn't serve any purpose. In fact, in my research, one case that it really stood out because it said name redacted versus so-and-so, right? So you would think that the court took extra precautions to ensure that this was a marital dispute, in fact. So they didn't want the name of the woman to even show up because the order itself records that it could have an impact on her future marital prospects, right? If she wants to marry and have a new life, and this shouldn't be in public memory. But again, where it falls short is it mentions the name of the parents and addresses, including the village and everything. So our understanding of the right to be forgotten is not really up to the mark, even when judges try to give it a wider meaning and give relief to the person asking for this, right? It's not been done in a really coherent way. So this is why the Supreme Court has now stepped in to sort of settle the law on the issue. So whatever the Supreme Court eventually decides, it will work as a solid jurisprudential foundation on how the right to be forgotten is going to be operationalized.
And will it be under the framework of the right to privacy essentially?
So right now we do not have a statutory framework that prescribes the right to be forgotten, as in you cannot find it in a legislation specifically. But having said that, the data protection bill is still in the pipeline, and that's something you should find in that law. But even in the absence of a statutory framework, right, if once a court recognizes the right to be forgotten as a constitutional right, it doesn't matter whether there is a statute or not, right? Of course, then the government will be forced to enact a statute. For example, in 2017, the government had argued in the Supreme Court that there is no fundamental right to privacy. But once the Supreme Court said that that's not the case and located privacy as a fundamental right, which is found in a trifecta of the right to life, the freedom of speech and expression, and the right to equality, right? Articles 14, 19, and 21. Then, of course, the government then can't deny such a right. So then it will have to be followed up with a statutory framework and everything. We do have international precedents for this. In the Europe, there is the General Data Protection Regulation, which is called GDPR. And if you're using a lot of apps which have a big presence in Europe, right, getting your data removed from that app is actually much more easier compared to, like, say, a Chinese app or an Indian app, so to say. So when you're operating in Europe, the GDPR is actually very stringently applied. Jurisdictions like Canada, Germany do have very strict regulation about this.
So Apurva, what would you say is a good use case scenario for something like this?
To give you an example of a very common use of this and a much needed use of this right to be forgotten, this is not some esoteric used only by people who are very concerned about their privacy. But imagine in these cases, which we call revenge porn cases, the right to be forgotten is crucial. You want to have, content about you removed, which has been put out there without your consent. That becomes really pivotal. And, we, of course, talked about criminal cases, but there is no reason why this shouldn't happen in personal cases, right? Like if you are fighting a divorce case, if you look at, a lot of our judgments on divorce, it goes from one of the parties having erectile dysfunction to, gory details about the domestic violence endured by the woman. All of these are very important in the judgment to narrate the facts and sequence of events. But there is really no reason to put their names out there because that's something that haunts people all their lives and they really cannot move on from, memories of these things. So these two issues, it will immediately have an impact whichever way the Supreme Court decides.
And in the end, we talk about the 22-year-old Manu Bhaker, who on Tuesday won her second Olympic medal at the ongoing Games in Paris. Bhaker won a bronze in the 10-meter air pistol mixed team match while partnering with Sarabjot Singh and became the first athlete from the country since independence to win 2 medals at the same Olympics. Her first win was the bronze she won in the individual women's 10-meter air pistol. Now, Indian Express's sports podcast has been running a daily series called The Pod of the Rings, bringing listeners daily coverage of the Paris Olympics. And in a recent episode, they discussed the significance of Manu Bhaker's win. We now present a short excerpt from that episode where host Amit Kamath spoke to Mihir Vasavda, who's currently in Paris covering the games.
Mihir, first of all, can you just talk about the significance of Manu winning 2 medals at the same Olympics? I mean, I don't even want to say rare, it's just historic, right?
In independent India's history, it hasn't happened before. And especially when you look at the time gap between at least the 2 bronze medals, individual bronze medals that India won. It was 44 years in 10 Olympics. K.D. Jadhav in 1952, Leander Pace in 1996. 44 years India needed to win 2 individual Olympic medals. And here you have a 22-year-old girl from Haryana taken just 72 hours, 3 days to do that. So that is itself quite remarkable. And then when you go deeper into India's Olympic history, मतलब हमें पता है रोना धोना ही ज़्यादा हुआ है. It's always been a case of fourth place finisher है, उसे legend बना दिया हमने. People who haven't won medals are legends of Indian sport. And when you look at it like that, it becomes even more significant. The third point, athletes spend their entire life, their entire every living second, every breath they take is basically to win an Olympic medal or to be a kind of in contention to win at least 1 Olympic medal in their life. And then you have someone winning 2 in 3 days. Indian athletes नहीं करते, मतलब we've never imagined an Indian athlete winning 2 medals at the same Olympics. We've seen other countries and हमने grudgingly admire किया है उन्हें. So for that to happen, I think is remarkable, the kind of composure and the impact this medal will have, I guess, guys. It'll be very similar to what, say, for example, Abhinav Bindra's gold medal had an impact in 2008, or when Sushil Kumar showed the entire country that it's possible to win not just 1, but 2 Olympic medals. Or the way Neeraj Chopra, the dominance and the nonchalance with which he won the Tokyo gold medal. Manu Bhaker's medal will have that sort of an impact. And you could see that immediately within the Indian contingent at the Paris Olympics. I caught up with Satvik Sairaj Reddy immediately after his doubles match against the Indonesian pair. And you could just see how happy everyone was. He said that Manu's second medal, A, has spread a lot of positivity in the team. B, it has kind of instilled a faith in them that this is their time. And that's the kind of energy that's being sent out from 300 kilometers away and from Châteauroux to Paris.
Right. Just talk to us about Manu's partner as well, because the first medal that she won, the first bronze medal that she won was in the 10-meter individual air pistol event. This event that she's won a bronze medal in today was a 10-meter mixed team event where she combined with Sarabjot Singh. Now, I know there has been a lot of talk about how, Indian shooting has not delivered over the last 2 Olympics. But just look at Manu's age, just look at Sarabjot's age. Both of them are 22-year-olds. This future does seem promising. We probably don't want to read too much into it, but still, 2 22-year-olds combining to win us an Olympic medal is not something that happens a whole lot for us. So, Mihir, just can you also talk about Sarabjot Singh?
Sarabjot is a very interesting person. Not for anything else, but just the personality that he is. And I'll come to that part again later, but Sarabjot, when I met him in Bhopal when the selection trials were going on in May, he was talking about how, since the time he started shooting, which is around when he was 14 or 15 years old, उसने उसके सारे जगह जहाँ पर उसकी सबसे पहले नजर पड़ती है सुबह उठकर, everything was covered in Olympic motifs and signs. So, say for example, his phone used to have Olympic medals. His gaming console, he's a big time gamer. So his gaming console had an Olympic medal ka wallpaper. The LED lights that, जो उसके gaming console पे था, वो उसने Olympic ring के colors में कर डाले थे. So that kind of obsessive he was. And he was totally shattered on Saturday after his qualification round, where he missed by a margin that, we can't see with human eye. Utna narrow tha margin. So for him to recover from that setback and come back and shoot the way he did yesterday, it's remarkable. And then to repeat it today again, I thought it was quite brilliant. And the pairing is quite fascinating too. Like Manu is someone, say for example, who likes riding horses. Sarabjot prefers fast cars. Manu plays violin. Sarabjot listens to Punjabi pop. Manu for concentration, juggles 3 or 4 balls at a time. Sarabjot sits in a dark room and stares at a candle. So they're very opposite people, though two of them. But purely when it comes to shooting, they're both very uncluttered minds. And I think that is what got them through today. When Sarabjot was shooting low scores at the beginning, it was Manu who was kind of holding fort and getting the job done. And towards the end, when Manu had a couple of poor shots, it was Sarabjot who stepped up and covered for her. So that kind of teamwork, that kind of, in shooting, of course, you can't coordinate all these things because eventually you're alone in the range. But they did step up and, deliver under pressure, which is something Indian shooters haven't done in the past, recent past at least.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.